All right, everyone. Well, thanks for joining. This is my second take, so I appreciate everyone being accommodating. But I wanted to get live on Thanksgiving. Not only do I want to start doing my lives again, I wanted to start, talking about politics on a more expansive term. I want to start, doing book reviews, talking about history, not always so much about Donald Trump all the time, because in order to understand Donald Trump, whether you hate him or you like him, you need to understand all the other aspects around you, the future, the past, the history, how things were done. That way you can take a more appropriate measure, and that way it probably won't bother you that much if you're so incensed about it, or if you're so obsessed with it in a good way. All the history that you learn will give you a realistic view of politics. So today I wanted to talk about this book that I just read. I just finished it about on Tuesday, I believe, or Monday. But it's called Washington by Ron Chernow, and it's about a 40-hour audiobook, which translates into, excuse me, about 1,000 pages in writing. But I'm an audiobook guy because I'm always on the go. If I had a choice to read the paperback, I probably wouldn't make it past page 5, just because of my attention span and the things I need to do in life. So was able to listen to it to an audiobook, which was real compelling because I got to understand and comprehend a lot more and follow it a lot better. So usually with these book reviews that I do, as soon as I finish the book, I do what's called a book report. I just write everything I know about it in bullet format. So I have a lot of points here, a lot of things that I want to talk about today, because I thought, usually when it comes to George Washington, as a kid, I wasn't really interested in the revolutionary history. I wasn't interested in, the boring Constitution and Declaration of Independence and all that. It only wasn't until I got older recently, these past couple years. So right now I'm on a big revolutionary kick. Earlier this year, I went to John Adams' his residence, and I also read that book. That's also going to be another review after this. And so now I switched over to George Washington. So now that I've read the book for George Washington, my next plan is to go visit Mount Vernon to see his historical place where he lived, and where a lot of the Revolutionary War and presidency and constitutional thoughts stemmed from there. So, like I said, first thing I want to say, personal opinion, is I am 360 on George Washington. I only had a neutral opinion about him. Boring. Yeah, he did everything. Always wondered why he was the greatest, when I always used to think that his presidency wasn't all that. But once we start going into everything, you're going to see why this guy is probably one of the greatest humans that has ever lived, because he is, like I said, very honest, a good man, always had good intentions, even at the highest level, always walked away from power, even at the highest level. It took a lot of selfless acts to get to where we are in America. Let's start this review. I figure this will be great for Thanksgiving, because we're always, either one side is, obsessed with Trump, or the other side hates this country. And that's my opinion. It's like, you love Trump or you hate this country. So I want people after this, hopefully, even if it reaches one, that's okay, but to realize, like, look, this country was founded on some good morals, on some good attitudes, and it wasn't always crooked as we thought it may be. All right, well, let's start getting into the life about George Washington. He was born in Virginia, born to a wealthy family, and off the top of my head, it was Augustine Washington. That was his second marriage set of children. So his father, Augustine, had 2 marriages. He had a set of kids from the first marriage. The wife died. He then married Mary Washington, which was the second wife and George Washington's mom, and then they had a set of kids, and I think there were mostly boys and a couple girls. So he was born to a wealthy family, but the thing about George Washington's life is that he was always in a predicament, right? Meaning that he was always caught in the middle and always had to be the guy to step up and resolve things. So when his father was 11 years old, when he was 11 years old, his father had passed away, which automatically at 11 years old made him responsible for not only land, but some slaves as well. So when he was 11 years old, he already had a set of 10 slaves. So thankfully, it worked out to where his mother and him and the older brothers co-managed everything. But even at 11 years old, he was already delegated some responsibility. So his father died at 11, which drastically changed his life because he was going to school and he was on his way to be, and usually fathers of that stature that are rich, that are of upper class, they usually send their kids to elite schools. Like back then there was Harvard, Yale. So most likely if George Washington's father was still alive, George Washington would have been educated in the elite. However, only education George Washington had was up to 11 years old. It was good education, but it was enough just to get him to read and write and do the basics and to let him learn from there on out. So once his father died, this was a difficult time for him because he was becoming a teenager. And I also forgot to mention his mother was really mean and hard on him. Never gave him any positive influence or love. All that came from the father. So all that kind of disappeared when the father passed away. So when he becomes a teenager, he decides to take up surveying. So that's when he starts learning about the land, the horses, guns, and things of that sort. So after a few years becoming a surveyor, he wants to join the military. So originally he wants to join the British Navy. So in the meantime, between his father dying and being a surveyor, Washington becomes friends with this family called the Fairfaxes. So they're a big family. Though one of the patriarchs is a general, and Washington is Washington. I forget which guy because this is a 1,000-page book. They kind of take him in. They know that he doesn't have a father. They know that Mary, the mom, is a bitch. So he kind of hangs out with them, and then they use their connections to help him out. So the Fairfaxes were ready to get him into the Navy. However, Mary Washington, the mom, shut it down. So he wasn't able to join the Navy. So she was able to convince the brothers and ultimately the Fairfaxes themselves to get him not to join the Navy. So from there, he joins the Virginia militia. And from there, he starts going on expeditions to Ohio and other western frontiers and lands that we kind of had, kind of didn't have. There was all land disputes and things with the Indian and French. So in the 1750s, I believe the early 1750s, he gets sent there, Washington, in order to settle some disputes with the British, with the French when it comes to their land. Because the French were going over there, building, trying to get resources, and the British didn't like that. So they sent the militia over there. They delegated the militia over there because, think about it, the Redcoats weren't there yet. So there wasn't a big military presence, especially to start quelling situations like this. So they send the militia out there, and Washington is just very arrogant, I want to take over the world. I want to do it all, and I know everything. So he's young, 21, 22, in the military. Back then you could rank pretty quickly because, men were rare, and B, it wasn't as structured as it was today. So he ranked up pretty quickly, and then they send him out to the Ohio country. And then when he goes out to the Ohio country, he runs into a bunch of problems. He built a Fort Necessity. Fort Necessity gets taken down because it was weak. It gets attacked. And then all the while he's trying to, negotiate with the Indians on how to get the French and how to get the French out of there. But the whole time the Indians are playing two-face. This guy named Half King, he was the one that was playing Washington and set him up when it came to the French from Fort Necessity and the other battles. So there was 2 battles when it came to the French and Indian War. There was one battle where a British officer, a high-ranking British officer, died, and then there was another one where a French high-ranking officer died. So the French and Indian War was a series of battles like the ones I just listed, that were disputed over the Ohio land. So Washington bungles out of that, right? The British are like, you know what, fuck you. This is your fault why you bungled this. We're not going to give you, you're in the military, but this is where you're going to be. We're not going to promote you. So this is like the first, nasty taste in Washington's mouth when it comes to the British, screwing America over. So nevertheless, he comes back home to Virginia as a hero. So now, he's celebrated. People think that, hey, you fought for, the country and the crown. So go you. So he rides that wave a little bit, and then he gets elected to the House of Burgesses. So getting elected to the House of Burgesses, like a congressman back then. So he gets all the praise. Does what he needs to do to get elected, because at first, he wasn't always the George Washington that we know him to be today. This was still a rookie. This was just a soldier coming out, and there were already established people in the Virginia land that had coveted his seat. So there was a lot of challenges to getting his seat when it came to the House of Burgesses. So he gets his House of Burgesses seat. And in between then, he's still a young man, right? In his early to mid-20s. So now, he's starting to grow up. He's goes back to serving. He goes back to Mount Vernon because that's a family estate. So him and his brothers are, doing a bunch of farming and cultivating and trying to finance for that. So right now, life is going good for Washington. So... And in between then, he marries Martha Custis. And Martha Custis, she was a widow to a wealthy man. And she had a lot of land. So marrying Martha Custis enabled Washington to really elevate himself in the Virginia society. So now, not only is he part of the House of Burgesses, he's part of the Custis... I forget her, Custis Dandridge dynasty when it comes to Martha and her fortune. With Martha comes 2 kids. I forget their names. I'm not sure if it's Jackie, but 2 Custis, 1 boy and 1 girl. So he raises them. He takes them in as their own. And so right now, life is good for Washington. He's got his marriage, the houses he's popping off. He's doing good on the House of Burgesses. And then comes the revolutionary stuff, right? The taxation, the harassment of citizens, all the harassment at the ports. So all this, indirectly affects Washington, right? Because he's got a farm to run. So he's getting taxed. He's getting shit held up at the dock. All his deliveries ain't coming through. And then he still has this bitter taste of, getting screwed over at the French and Indian War. So the tension of Washington, getting upset at the British and wanting to revolt is building up slowly but surely, because he's just as upset as people were at the Boston Tea Party for the Stamp Act, the Intolerable Acts, etc. So all this starts to pile up. So they have they start having these meetings, these conventions about what we need to do, blah blah blah. This is all leads up to 1775 and the Declaration of Independence. So the British find out that George Washington is involved in all these revolutionary activities. So they send out an intermediary, or a person, to tell him, look, the British said if you're going to go forward with this revolutionary stuff, that this is treason and that we will hang you and we will take Mount Vernon and hang your family as well. So this sets off George Washington. It's like, you know what? Fuck this. We're all in. Whatever we need to do, we need to do. So that's when the Continental Congress starts. And then that's when they pick him. That's when they decide to declare. That's when they pick him to be general. Because what I learned is that we didn't declare war. We declared war before. I mean, it wasn't so much war. There was already British troops coming because this rebellion was rising. So it was at the Continental Congress where Washington decided, hey, not Washington. It was where they decided, excuse me, not Washington. We're going to start fighting and eventually go on to declare independence. But between 1775 and 1776, the British troops were already coming. There was already battles of, the shot heard around the world, Lexington and Concord, where that was the first battle. So in between that time, that's when Washington becomes general, and that's when the army starts forming. So the shot heard around the world happens in 1775. The army starts forming up. But this is where the real heroic stuff comes in. This is where the real revered Washington comes in. This war lasts for almost 10 years, right? From 1775 to about 1782, 83, give or take. So this is a long war. So when this war started, this wasn't some spirited revolution where you think where everyone was united and everything was just going great and went the U.S.'s way because of the spirit. That's what we portray now. But back then, things were really rough. You had a guy who was either facing victory or treason, and then on top of that has to command an army which has no resources, low on weapons, low on food, low on generals, low on troops, because these were militias, so these were volunteers, so these troops weren't getting paid. These troops were barely eating. Some of them will die out in the wintertime. There are a lot of casualties that got swept away because they were frozen to death. Some of them got sick. So Washington, he had to improvise. When they were passing New York, he stopped all the troops right there, and he said everyone has to get inoculated to smallpox, and which was one of probably the best moves he could have made, because throughout the wintertime and throughout smallpox season, his troops were able to be immune for that. So it cut out a big risk when it came to surviving the war. So in 1775, we have the shot heard around the world. Then we have the Declaration of Independence. But then we start having, all these battles. We start losing. We lost New York, the Battle of New York. We start losing battles left and right. And then, so in that meantime, we're, like I said, we're low on supplies. We're low on troops. There's only 1 year enlistments. Half of them are deserting. So, and then you have to train them in the meantime. So this is terrible compared to the French. I mean, the Prussian troops that were coming, as well as the British troops. They were organized. They had unlimited resources, unlimited troops, good uniforms, all that stuff, good camps. But eventually, things start turning around because Washington realized, look, we don't have to win. There's no big battle we have to win. We just have to wear them down and keep our troops going. We just have to keep this going until we get until we get ahead. So finally, they start winning battles, right? You have the Battle of Trenton. You have other southern battles that other generals started winning down south. So things start moving along smoothly. But even though things start moving along smoothly, there's still tension, right? People start doubting George Washington because he wasn't a good general. There was a lot of losses building up. People were pissed off, starving, dying out. So people were starting to reconsider his strategy and looking for replacements. So there were a lot of subordinates that were trying to get his position. Excuse me. And there were also people like his generals, Benedict Arnold, and I think General Lee, guys that didn't feel appreciated and ended up betraying the French. Betraying the colonists to the UK, spying for the UK, spying for the British. So he had, not only is Washington dealing with all these logistical issues with the troops, he's dealing with a lot of infighting. So, but like I said, his luck starts turning around, right? We have the Battle of Trenton, we have the Southern victories with the other battles, and then finally, parallel to what Washington's doing, we have Thomas Jefferson and John Adams trying to secure French support. So finally, the French support is secured, and then they start bringing in a lot of troops, a lot of manpower, a lot of resources, a lot of money, a lot of weapons, and then they bring one of their best generals, Marquis de Lafayette. So Marquis de Lafayette, and then they also bring General von Steuben, but he was a Prussian general. But those two, they really helped the military because they brought decorum, they brought discipline, they taught them how to march, how to use weapons, and how to use techniques to fight the British, because those guys, they were experienced against fighting the British all around Europe in previous wars, so they brought a lot of first-hand knowledge on how the British moves. So, and it turns out the French and the colonists worked out very well. There were some tensions initially when it came to command and how the French want to do things, but that all then eventually got worked out. So things start turning around, they start winning battles, and then finally the last battle is where they finally corner up Cornwallis and he surrenders. So, and I believe that was in the 1780s, 1782, 1783. And so after that, they signed the Treaty of Paris. Washington doesn't have to do all that because he's tired and shit's done. He's been on the road for 9 years. He's only been to Mount Vernon, I think, for a week. They totaled the days 1 week within those 8 years. He did a couple days in a 4-year period and another couple days in another 4-year period. So he's tired. So he starts contemplating retirement. He goes back to Mount Vernon. In Mount Vernon, he hosts guests. What else does he do? He hosts guests. He goes back to his farming, and then he's part of all these academic societies like the Cincinnati Society, the Freemasons. Then he keeps his ear into politics. He wants to know what's going on. Likes to be in the mix. So in between that, he still stays busy. He's not really retired. So during this time, they have the Articles of Confederation. So the Articles of Confederation is being drafted, is being written, is being implemented, but they're finding a lot of problems with it. They can't get anything done. There's a lot of infighting, inaction. No one knows how to tax money. It's just a real stagnant thing on the government. So now there's rumbling, starts talking, everyone wants to start doing a convention. And so Washington, he was already pissed off with the Articles of Confederation. So they tell him, like, hey, look, we're going to do a convention. You want to come? He's like, oh, no, I don't want people thinking that, I don't have trust in our new government over here trying to rewrite things. Maybe we let it simmer a bit. They're like, no, we got all the states here. Come on, it's going to be fun. It's going to be here in Philadelphia, and we'll draft it out. We'll rock it out. It's going to be, everyone's going to be there. Benjamin Franklin, John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, Monroe, Hamilton, we're all going to be there. Come on, it's like a party, He's like, all right, I'll come. So he goes to Philly, and so they do the Constitutional Convention, and then they elect him. So they elect him to be the head of it. So during these 6 weeks, writing the Constitution, 1788, they're duking it out, but he's the head of it, meaning that, he oversees the votes, he approves, disapproves some of the more administrative stuff, not, the Constitution. That has to be voted on, consensus, etc. So they duke that out, and they finally come out with the Constitution. So given that the Constitution, revolves around the president, all the founding fathers asked, well, who should we elect president? Well, easy choice, everyone says. Well, let's elect George Washington. We loved him during the French and Indian War. He got us out of the British hands. He got us to a constitution. Let's do it. So he agrees in 1788, and so in 1789, they start getting the government ready. There's a lot of administrative stuff going on. It's not a simple 1, 2, 3. So all the logistics start going on, and then he finally gets inaugurated. He gets inaugurated in April of 1789, and then he starts defining the presidency. All right, so during this is brand new, right? I don't even think, according to the book, I could be wrong, but they didn't even know that they were going to do 4 years. So Washington was just, this whole time, he was just winging it, right? So he took it year by year, right? So, all right, I might do 1 year. I might do 2 years. Oh, I might retire next year. Fuck this, I'm done. But people keep convincing them, like, no, the country's still new. This is fresh. You got to go. You got to keep moving. So during this time, everything is established. A lot of what we know as being president today is established, right? He establishes the cabinet, Secretary of War, Treasury, Secretary of State, and then slowly those positions are being carved out in their own traditions. And then there was also some precedents set, for example, when it came to Congress, every time they didn't vote the way he wanted to, he would storm in there and try to intimidate people to vote for what he wanted. So finally, he found out that wasn't working and decided that, anything the Congress votes on, he has to do it proper, either veto it or, go through the proper channels. So, because back then it was just as simple as that. You ride up in your horse, you storm in the chamber, and be like, yo, what the hell's going on here? This isn't what I wanted. So he came to find out that was a bit too dictatorial. So which is why you don't see presidents, walk up in Congress doing those kinds of things. So establishing the cabinet, and then also establishing day-to-day stuff. Even though it was 1700s, 1800s, he had a communication system to where everyone was briefed, he was briefed, and then everything was delegated correctly. So whether that's in 1799 or 2025, those administrative skills are always relevant and still work in any setting. So having everyone on board with no communication or really admin issues really helped. He also carved out the VP position, right? He knew how to keep the VP in check. He didn't involve them in any cabinet meetings and kept them in the Senate. A little bit different today because, presidents have came and gone. But like I said, this was the first time. This was just, everything was a first. So there was no handbook to this. Also, another good point I just remembered, not in my list here, there was no successor for the presidency. So when George Washington was sick, or when he was not able to perform the duties of the presidency, like for example, he had a tumor in his thigh that put him out, and he also had bad pneumonia infections and bacterial infections that put him out during his presidency. All he did was delegate all those presidential tasks to people like Henry Knox or his secretary, people that have nothing to do with the presidency. So already there were, you can see in retrospect that there were some issues with succession and the health of the president and etc. So, all in all, the first 4 years, it was just defining everything, trying to get money, trying to tax, trying to settle debts with all the European countries and the countries within. So a lot of the first 4 years was really dominated by the Treasury Department, if you think about it. Alexander Hamilton had to define a lot of the economics when it came to, building the country and making it stable, like defining the national debt, levying taxes, things of that sort. So there was a lot of this first term that was dominated by Alexander Hamilton, which we still use today. But the caveat with Alexander Hamilton is that he was a shit stirrer. He was a troublemaker. He was a drama. So he was always backstabbing people, always into it with Jefferson and Adams and Monroe. No, Madison. I always get Madison Monroe confused with Madison. So they were always in cahoots with each other, always backstabbing each other, Federalists, anti-Federalists. So this is another lesson for Washington. All all his subordinates, right? The VP, the Secretary of State, the Secretary of Treasury. I can't think of what Madison was at the moment right now, but another important member, always doing and fighting, talking shit about each other in the newspapers, writing pamphlets about each other. So now there's all this infighting. And this is bad for Washington. So one by one, they end up leaving. Jefferson ends up leaving. Hamilton ends up leaving. And so that's when Washington starts to realize, look, if I'm going to have a cabinet, I need everyone on board and everyone on the same page as me, because this was ridiculous. So after all the administration infighting and all that and everything above that, he starts getting tired. He's like, you know what? I'm not doing no second term. I think 4 years is enough. Peace out. I want to die and retire in Mount Vernon already. So everyone's like, his best friend was Henry Knox, if I didn't mention that. His best friend was Henry Knox. So him, Henry Knox, Thomas Jefferson, everybody's like, look, please, we just started out. We need a little bit more continuity, a little bit more stability till we get shit right 4 years from now. So, and back then, Washington was so frustrated. Like I said, you had all that infighting with Jefferson and Hamilton really made the administration look bad and really got under Washington's skin. So he's like, no, fuck this. But they're like, come on. So he's like, all right, I'm going to do it. But again, he goes to the next. He's in the same mind frame. I'll do it for a couple years, I'm done. I'll do it for a year or two, and I'm done. But like I said, the fighting in politics gets worse now, because he thought, all right, well, I got rid of, slowly but surely, I got rid of all these people under my cabinet. Now I can work, and now I can get this country on the right path, or I can just leave and we're good. No, it gets worse. You have the Jay Treaty, which not only caused a lot of strife with John Jay and Tom and Hamilton and all that really pissed the people off, because it looked like we were bending over for the British. So the second term was more infighting because of the Jay Treaty, and then all of Hamilton's shenanigans, writing these pamphlets, trying to screw over Thomas Jefferson, trying to screw over, because right now they already know, it's like the presidency now. They already know Washington's on his way out. So now they're doing all this. That's when all the political campaign starts, like all these pamphlets, all these scandals. So finally in 1797, he does the Jay Treaty, does everything else. He's like, all right, I'm done. I did 4 years, and that's it. So they beg him again, please, can you do one more term? He's like, no, I'm done. I'm fucking done. I'm done. So John Adams gets elected, which was a good pick. Not, I wouldn't say in Washington, but a guy that had good meaning, but had a lot of emotions get to him. So, but one thing they didn't realize when John Adams gets elected is like, oh shit, now that Washington stepped down, we don't have a general for our army. So Adams had to go hat in hand at the urging of Hamilton. He's like, look, I need a general for my army. Can you just at least do it in name? You don't have to do anything. You just, it just gives us credibility. Hey, we still have Washington on our side in case the British or the French or any other foreign power want to fuck with us, or the government, just to show that government, Washington is still in charge, but on paper. So Washington's like, yeah, I can do that for you, but I want to pick my people. So John Adams was like, all right, yeah, you can do that. I'll let you pick some people. Well, then George Washington was like, all right, well, I want Hamilton on my team. And John Adams was like, no, absolutely not. We are not going to have Hamilton run the army. So they fall out because of that, because Washington's like, well, why are you dragging me into this shit when I should be able to pick my people? And then John Adams was like, well, I'm the president of the United States. I should, everything I say should go. So Washington Adams sort of fall out, but they kind of walk away amicable. Washington's pissed off, but he's like, you know what? I'm not gonna overstep the president. That's what he wants. That's what he wants. But I'm pissed off. So they end on not so bad terms. And that was it. So after that, they didn't really explain. I have to look that part up. They didn't really explain whether he stepped down or not. I guess he was still in command when that happened, when he died. But now, 1797. So 1797, everything is done, right? He's finally able to retire with his wife and his grandchildren and with Mount Vernon. But as always through his life, he's always in debt, right? He's never had money. He was never rich. He was always broke, right? And you think about it. When he was 11 years old, he inherited slaves. And then also a farm. But those things cost money. And he didn't have control of that until he was an adult. And when he was an adult, he was always on the road, being a soldier or a surveyor. So there was only a little bit of time where he was actually able to make some profit off of Mount Vernon. And then in the 1770s and 1780s, he was fighting a war, and there wasn't any good currency back then. So he died, and he didn't die with much money. He only died with assets, like with slaves and land. But there was always a problem with actual money to pay for things, to finance things. And then also, to Washington's character, he also took care of all his nieces and nephews. After all his siblings died, he took them in, gave them a room and board in Mount Vernon, put them through school, and then also took care of their children as well. So all of his children's kids and their kids, he took care of them. So this poor guy never had a chance to relax, this guy. So finally, in 1797, he steps down, and then it's nothing, just a farm now. So he starts, getting his farm back together. He finds that, I think it's just him being OCD, he finds that the farm is not in good shape. So he redoes the whole farm, and then he starts growing whiskey, which whiskey finally starts turning the finances around. So during that time, he's got all these slaves, right? And he's always had to contend with slavery all his whole life. And sometimes we fault him for that. But back in those times, it was a real predicament for him, because when he was 11 years old, he inherited not only his land, but his slaves, which he wasn't able to control. So when his parents and his brother took them, the land and the slaves were the only resource for them. Like I said, because there was always, the money wasn't always steady. And then with those, you had to pay taxes on slaves. You had to pay taxes on the land. And then if you got rid of the slaves, he had no money. and then he had no land. So over time, the politics starts getting to him. A lot of the founding fathers are abolitionists. He serves with black soldiers. He has a lot of instances where slaves are loyal to him, and he takes them in. So he starts evolving on slavery. So right around this time, this is when he decides to emancipate his slaves. And I also want to say a lot of the reason why he couldn't emancipate his slaves is because a lot of them were his wife's slaves, and those wife slaves belong to another family. So the slavery financial thing, it gets very complicated, because if somebody buys you, then you belong to that family, so you're never really free until they say you're free. So the poor slaves. But my point is, I want people to see the reality of Washington's slavery thing. It wasn't he didn't always want them, and he wasn't always mean to them or didn't treat them bad. It was just a thing of his time, and it was something that he always had a difficulty with, but ultimately came to the conclusion where they need to be freed, and eventually America needs to be emancipated for slavery. So finally, in 1799, life is going good. He gets the life that he wants, right? He gets the farm going. He gets his wills done. So now he's just chilling. So one day in December of 1799, he goes on a horse ride to go and check out Mount Vernon. Do the inspections, look at the overseers, what they're doing, what the slaves are doing. And then he starts having a sore throat. And then with the sore throat, he's like, oh, fuck it. It's just a cold. It'll go away. It's wintertime. I'm George Washington. I've survived much worse. But later that night, his throat swells up shut pretty much. So now he can't breathe. So Martha goes and gets the doctors and all that. And they start doing all kinds of stuff to him. They start bleeding him. He bled out 5 pints of blood. They give him all kinds of weird chemicals like mercury and all this shit. They give him enemas. So they're just doing everything but treating the problem. Swallowing molasses and everything. So thankfully throughout this day, George Washington has enough conscience and airways to talk to people and to say his last rites. So that whole day he was just laying there, because it was only a day. I thought it was a couple of days. It was only a whole day from when his throat swelled up to when he died. He was able to edit his will one more time, and then able to say last words to his wife and his staff members. And his last words was "'tis well." So what he did is he felt his pulse, and then the last description of him was him feeling his pulse, and then just dying there on the bed in Mount Vernon. So after a long life of being, exploring the United States frontier and serving our country through many wars and battles and many different positions, the big Washington finally dies. As he's quoted saying on his last day, I die hard, but I'll die well. So the moral of the story is that not everyone in politics is bad or self-serving. When you look at what this country was built on, it was built on people who didn't want a tyrannical government, or a government that did not give a crap about them, that united together no matter what political differences they had, and showed up for their country. We were starving, we had no money, we had no food, and we were facing a superpower. So with grit, with determination, with willpower, we were able to overcome slowly but surely. So just think about that when you're bitching about Donald Trump or you've got some DEI issue or whatever, think about where we started and to where we are, from revolutionizing ourselves to freeing the slaves to going on the moon to getting civil rights to getting the internet, all these transformational things that we experience in America would have not happened had it been for the courage of George Washington and his contemporaries around him. And so thankfully, thanks to people like Ron Chernow and all the other good authors, I'm able to be educated on these things, because when you're in school, this shit is boring, right? Nobody wants to learn about this old paintings and what happened before technology. But now that we're older and we tend to learn about these things and want to learn about what's before us. So thank you very much. I hope everyone has a good Thanksgiving. I'll be posting this on YouTube as well, so be on the lookout for that. Hope everyone has a good day. I'm about to go for my run, my second run. Every week I do back to back, so switched it to Wednesday, Thursday. Oh, excuse me, Wednesday, Thursday. All these hiccups. All right, well, thank you. Take care.